You think being excessively kind and helpful to everyone is purely virtuous? Maslow discovered something unsettling in his research on motivation and psychological health. He found that chronic self-sacrificing behavior and compulsive kindness often don't originate from genuine compassion. They're frequently defensive strategies serving unmet psychological needs, particularly at the love and belonging or esteem levels of the hierarchy. People who couldn't say no, who constantly put others first, who defined themselves through helping weren't operating from psychological abundance. They were operating from deficit, using kindness as currency to purchase the acceptance and worth they couldn't generate internally. The most disturbing part? Maslow identified that this pattern, while appearing virtuous from outside, actually prevents genuine psychological development because it keeps people stuck serving needs that never get satisfied through this method. This isn't about criticizing kindness or claiming helping others is bad. This is about distinguishing between authentic compassion that comes from wholeness and compulsive caretaking that comes from emptiness trying to fill itself. And recognizing which pattern you're operating from determines whether your kindness serves development or prevents it. Not every kind person is operating from psychological deficit. There's a critical difference between what Maslow observed in self-actualized people, genuine compassion and helping from overflow, and what psychologists call compulsive caretaking, people-pleasing or codependency, helping driven by desperate need for acceptance, worth, or control. Self-actualized people were kind when it served genuine purpose, but they had clear boundaries, could say no without guilt, and didn't need help in order to feel valuable. They helped because they had resources to share, not because their sense of worth depended on being needed. But people operating from deficiency needs, particularly unmet belonging or esteem needs, use helping behavior strategically, often unconsciously, to gain acceptance they fear they wouldn't receive otherwise or to prove worth they didn't genuinely feel. The behavior looks identical from outside. Both people are being helpful, but the psychological source and consequences are completely opposite. What appears as similar kindness from outside reflects either healthy giving or desperate purchasing of acceptance and worth from inside. Real understanding requires examining what's actually motivating the behavior, rather than judging it by external appearance. In this video, I'm going to reveal what Maslow and subsequent researchers identified as a shadow side of kindness, when helping behavior is actually serving defensive psychological functions rather than expressing genuine compassion. You'll discover how to distinguish between authentic generosity and compulsive caretaking, what unmet needs drive excessive kindness, and why this pattern actually prevents the very acceptance and worth it's trying to create. These are insights from humanistic psychology, codependency research, and studies of helping behavior about what makes kindness either healthy or pathological. By the end, you'll understand whether your own helpful behavior comes from wholeness or from wounds, and why the difference matters enormously for your development. This isn't a video saying all kindness is fake or that helping others is problematic. This is psychology distinguishing between patterns that look similar but originate from opposite sources and create opposite outcomes. This video is for people who struggle to say no, who feel responsible for others' emotions, who define their worth through being helpful, or who feel resentful despite choosing to help. If you're exhausted from constant caretaking, if you feel guilty when you prioritize yourself, if you can't receive help as easily as you give it, if your kindness often feels compulsive rather than chosen, you're about to understand what's psychologically happening and why it matters. If you're ready to examine honestly what drives your helpful behavior, keep watching. Think about the last time someone asked you for help. Notice what happened internally before you responded. Did you freely choose whether to help based on your actual capacity and the genuine value of helping? Or did you feel immediate anxiety about saying no, fear of disappointing them, or sense that your worth depended on helping regardless of your own needs? For many people operating from what psychologists call compulsive caretaking, the question of whether to help isn't really a question. Saying no feels impossible because their psychological stability depends on being perceived as helpful, kind, and needed. This isn't generosity. It's psychological survival strategy. Maslow understood that behavior serving deficiency needs looks different psychologically from behavior serving growth needs. When you help because you fear rejection if you don't, or because your sense of worth depends on being needed, or because you're avoiding your own problems by focusing on others, you're not operating from authentic kindness. You're using helping behavior to manage anxiety about unmet needs. The psychological weight of this pattern is exhaustion combined with resentment. You're giving constantly, but feeling depleted rather than fulfilled. And you often resent the very people you've chosen to help, because the helping isn't actually satisfying your underlying needs, even though you can't stop doing it. Maslow's hierarchy provides a framework for understanding when helping behavior serves deficiency needs rather than growth needs. At the third level, love and belonging, people need to feel accepted, included, and valued by others. When this need isn't met through secure relationships where you're accepted for who you are, people unconsciously develop strategies to earn acceptance. One common strategy is becoming indispensable through helpfulness. If I'm constantly helpful, needed, and giving, people will accept me because they need me. This creates a pattern where your helping is actually bid for belonging. You're not helping because you want to. You're helping because you fear that without being helpful, you won't be accepted or loved. The psychologist Karen Horney studied this pattern extensively and called it moving toward people, a defensive strategy where you try to gain security and acceptance by becoming what others need. At the fourth level, esteem. People need to feel competent, valuable, and worthy of respect. When this need isn't met through genuine accomplishment and internal sense of worth, people use helping to prove value. If I'm constantly helping others, solving their problems, and being needed, then I must be valuable and worthy. This creates a pattern where your helping is actually an attempt to generate self-worth through being necessary to others. The problem with both patterns, the helping doesn't actually satisfy the underlying need. Being needed isn't the same as being loved. Being useful isn't the same as feeling genuinely worthy. You're getting temporary relief. People accept your help, they need you, but the underlying need remains unmet because the acceptance is conditional on your continued helping, and the worth is dependent on external need rather than internal reality. The psychologist Melody Beattie studied codependency extensively and documented that people with this pattern define themselves through relationships and caretaking, feel responsible for others' feelings and problems, have difficulty identifying their own needs and feelings, and fear abandonment so intensely they'll sacrifice themselves to maintain relationships. Her research showed this develops from childhood experiences where acceptance was conditional on being good, helpful, and not having needs of your own. The psychiatrist Harriet Lerner wrote about what she calls overfunctioning, taking too much responsibility in relationships and doing for others what they should do for themselves. She found this creates complementary underfunctioning, where the other person becomes increasingly dependent, which then reinforces the overfunctioner's sense of being needed. The cycle maintains itself while preventing both people from developing genuine capability and healthy interdependence. The psychologist Alice Miller studied the drama of the gifted child and documented how many children learn to attune completely to others' needs while suppressing their own, developing into adults who are exquisitely sensitive to what others need but disconnected from their own needs and feelings. These adults appear selfless and giving but are actually operating from deep wound that makes receiving love or asking for help feel impossible. The researcher Breen Brown studied shame and vulnerability, finding that people who struggle with shame often use perfectionistic helping, being the perfect friend, perfect helper, perfect caretaker, as a way to earn belonging and worth they believe they don't inherently deserve. The helping becomes performance designed to ward off the shame of not being enough. But here's what Maslow specifically identified about the difference between authentic compassion in self-actualized people and compulsive helping in people operating from deficiency needs. First difference, choice versus compulsion. Self-actualized people could choose whether to help based on genuine assessment of the situation, their capacity, and the actual value of helping. They could say no without guilt when helping didn't serve genuine purpose. People operating from deficiency needs couldn't really choose. They felt compelled to help even when it depleted them, even when the helping wasn't truly useful, even when it prevented others from developing their own capability. The yes wasn't free choice, it was defensive necessity. Second difference, clear boundaries versus enmeshed responsibility. Self-actualized people had clear sense of where their responsibility ended and others began. They could help without taking ownership of outcomes or feeling responsible for others' emotions. People operating from deficiency needs had enmeshed boundaries. They felt responsible for others' feelings, problems, and happiness. They couldn't separate their well-being from others' well-being, creating exhausting codependence. Third difference, sustainable giving versus self-depletion. Self-actualized people gave from overflow. They had resources to share, and giving felt nourishing rather than depleting. People operating from deficiency needs gave from depletion. They sacrificed their own needs, ignored their own limits, and became exhausted and resentful even as they continued helping. The giving wasn't sustainable because it was coming from empty tank. Fourth difference: genuine effectiveness versus enabling. Self-actualized people helped in ways that actually increased others' capability and independence. They're help-empowered. People operating from deficiency needs often helped in ways that created or maintained dependency because being needed was psychologically necessary to them. They're help-enabled rather than empowered. Fifth difference: no need for recognition versus requiring appreciation. Self-actualized people could help without needing acknowledgement or appreciation. The helping itself was satisfying. People operating from deficiency needs needed recognition and appreciation to validate their worth. When help wasn't acknowledged or appreciated, they felt hurt, resentful, or worthless. Sixth difference: able to receive versus only able to give. Self-actualized people could both give and receive help comfortably. People operating from deficiency needs could give but couldn't receive. Accepting help triggered shame, vulnerability, or feeling indebted. This one-directional flow indicated the helping was defensive rather than genuine. Maslow found that compulsive helpers often became resentful martyrs, exhausted from constant giving, angry that others didn't appreciate enough, yet unable to stop the pattern because their psychological survival felt dependent on being needed and helpful. This is a dark truth behind certain kindness. It's not actually kind in the deepest sense because it's not free giving. It's transaction attempting to purchase acceptance and worth. And when the purchase doesn't deliver what's needed, resentment builds. But here's what your specific helping patterns reveal about which needs are driving your behavior and whether it's healthy or defensive. Pattern 1. Compulsive yes, guilty no. You say yes to almost everything. Feel intense guilt or anxiety when you consider saying no, and continue helping even when exhausted or resentful. This indicates belonging-based helping. You fear that saying no means rejection, abandonment, or losing the relationship. What you actually need: secure relationships where your worth isn't contingent on being helpful, therapy to address fear of abandonment, practice saying no and discovering relationships survive. Pattern 2. Helper identity. Your sense of who you are is entirely built on being helpful, needed, and solving others' problems. You don't know who you'd be if you weren't the helper. This indicates esteem-based helping. Your worth depends on being needed because you haven't developed internal sense of value. What you actually need: building identity beyond helping role, developing genuine self-worth through competence and values rather than through being needed, recognizing your inherent worth independent of usefulness. Pattern 3. Resentful giving. You help but feel angry, taken advantage of, or unappreciated. You keep score what you've done for others. This indicates the helping is actually transaction that isn't working. You're given to get acceptance or appreciation, but you're not receiving what you need in return. What you actually need: recognizing you're choosing to help and can choose differently, examining why you're giving when it doesn't feel good, learning to ask for what you need directly rather than covertly through helping. Pattern 4. Emotional responsibility. You feel responsible for others' feelings, try to fix everyone's problems, and can't tolerate others' distress without trying to solve it. This indicates enmeshed boundaries where you can't separate your well-being from others. What you actually need: developing clear boundaries, recognizing others are responsible for their own emotions, learning to provide support without taking ownership. Pattern 5. Unbalanced giving. You give constantly but can't receive. Accepting help feels uncomfortable, vulnerable, or like weakness. This indicates that giving is defensive rather than genuine. You're maintaining position of being needed to avoid vulnerability of being the one with needs. What you actually need: practicing receiving, becoming comfortable with vulnerability and interdependence, recognizing receiving isn't weakness. Pattern 6. Enabling pattern. Your helping actually keeps others dependent, prevents their growth, or solves problems they should solve themselves. This indicates your psychological need to be needed is overriding what actually serves others. What you actually need: recognizing true helping empowers rather than creates dependency, examining why you need others to need you, learning to help in ways that build capability. Pattern 7. Authentic compassion. You help when it genuinely serves purpose. You can say no without guilt. You give from fullness rather than emptiness. You don't need recognition, and you can receive as easily as you give. This indicates healthy helping from growth motivation rather than deficiency needs. This is the goal pattern. Maintain it rather than questioning it. The transformation that occurs when you recognize your helping behavior is serving defensive functions rather than expressing genuine compassion is initially destabilizing but ultimately liberating. Remember that compulsive need to help, that guilt when you prioritize yourself, that exhaustion from constant giving, that resentment despite choosing to help. When you identify these as symptoms of unmet belonging or esteem needs rather than as virtue, your path forward becomes clear even though the work is challenging. Your excessive helpfulness isn't moral superiority. It's defense mechanism attempting to earn what you fear you don't inherently deserve. Your inability to say no isn't testament to your kindness. It's evidence of unmet needs that require different addressing. Understanding this creates several shifts. You can identify which specific need you're helping is trying to satisfy, primarily belonging, fear of rejection, esteem, need to feel valuable, or both. Your answer reveals what you actually need to address. You can recognize why the helping never quite satisfies. It's meeting symptoms of the need. People accept your help, need you, without addressing the need itself, unconditional acceptance, inherent worth. You can begin saying no as act of self-respect rather than as selfishness, recognizing that protecting your capacity is necessary for sustainable giving. You can examine your relationships honestly. Are people in your life because they value you or because they need you? This distinction reveals whether you created codependent dynamics. You can start building genuine self-worth and secure belonging through appropriate means rather than through being indispensable. Now here's where understanding becomes practically useful through specific interventions for each defensive helping pattern. If you're experiencing compulsive yes driven by belonging needs, first, examine your relationships. Do you have people who value you beyond your helpfulness? If not, you're maintaining relationships through transaction rather than genuine connection. Second, practice saying no to small requests and observe what happens. Often you'll discover relationships survive your boundaries better than your anxiety predicted. Third, build relationships where you're known and accepted for who you are rather than for what you do. This requires vulnerability about your actual self rather than perfect, helpful persona. Fourth, work with therapists on attachment healing if fear of abandonment is severe. This often originates from childhood experiences requiring therapeutic work. If you're experiencing helper identity driven by esteem needs, first, develop identity and worth beyond helping role. Who are you when you're not helping someone? What do you value about yourself beyond usefulness? Second, build genuine competence in domains that matter to you, creating self-worth based on capability rather than on being needed. Third, examine whether you're keeping others dependent to maintain your sense of being necessary. True helping empowers. Enabling creates dependency that serves your needs rather than theirs. Fourth, practice recognizing your inherent worth. You have value for existing, not just for what you do for others. If you're experiencing resentful giving, first, recognize you're choosing to help and can choose differently. Resentment comes from acting like you have no choice while actually choosing. Second, stop helping and see what happens. If relationships end, they were based on transaction rather than genuine connection. Third, learn to ask for what you need directly rather than covertly through excessive giving that expects reciprocation. Fourth, examine why you're giving when it doesn't feel good. What are you afraid would happen if you stopped? If you're experiencing enmeshed boundaries, first, practice recognizing where your responsibility ends and others begins. You're not responsible for others' emotions or problems unless you cause them directly. Second, learn to provide support without taking ownership. You can care about someone's struggle without solving it for them. Third, develop tolerance for others' distress without immediately fixing it. Sometimes people need to sit with difficulties to develop their own capability. Fourth, work on self-regulation so you can maintain your own emotional stability independent of other states. If you're unable to receive help, first, recognize that refusing to receive creates one-directional relationships that aren't sustainable. Healthy relationships involve mutual giving and receiving. Second, Practice accepting help with small things and notice what feelings arise. Often it's vulnerability, fear of obligation, or shame about having needs. Third, work on becoming comfortable with interdependence. Humans need each other, and that's not weakness. Fourth, examine childhood messages about having needs. Many compulsive helpers learned early that their needs were burden or that having needs meant being weak. If you're an enabling pattern, first, recognize that your need to be needed is harming rather than helping the other person. True love wants others to develop capability, not maintain dependency. Second, step back and allow natural consequences. When others face challenges, they can solve themselves. Third, help in ways that build capability rather than create dependency. Teach rather than do. Support rather than solve. Fourth, examine what you're getting from being needed and find healthier ways to meet that need. For everyone experiencing defensive helping, recognize that genuine kindness feels good, is sustainable, comes from choice rather than compulsion, and doesn't acquire recognition or create resentment. If your helping doesn't have these qualities, examine what's actually driving it. Understand that building secure attachment and genuine self-worth is what actually allows authentic compassion. You can't truly give from fullness until you have fullness. Practice self-compassion. The defensive helping pattern developed as an attempt to get legitimate needs met, and it made sense given your history and circumstances. It's not moral failing. It's adaptation that's no longer serving you. Build life where your worth isn't dependent on being needed, and your belonging isn't conditional on being helpful. This allows helping to become choice rather than compulsion. Develop balanced relationships with mutual giving and receiving rather than one-directional caretaking dynamics. Here's what Maslow's framework ultimately reveals about helping behavior. Kindness that comes from wholeness looks and feels completely different from kindness that comes from wounds trying to heal themselves through others. Genuine compassion is sustainable, boundary-respecting, empowering, and freely chosen. Defensive helping is exhausting, boundary-violating, enabling, and compulsive. The dark truth isn't that kindness itself is problematic. It's that what often appears as kindness is actually unconscious strategy to earn acceptance and worth that can't be earned through helping, but only through building secure relationships and genuine self-esteem. If you're recognizing yourself in the defensive patterns, understand that millions of people develop the same adaptation, learning early that their worth was conditional on being good, helpful, and not having needs. You learned to survive through caretaking, and it worked well enough that you kept doing it into adulthood. But now the cost is visible. The exhaustion, the resentment, the one-sided relationships, the inability to receive, the lack of genuine intimacy, because no one knows the real you beneath the helpful persona. The path forward requires examining what you actually need, building secure attachment and self-worth through appropriate means, and allowing helping to become expression of wholeness rather than attempt to create it. This is challenging work because it means disappointing people who become accustomed to your compulsive helping, setting boundaries where you've had none, and risking that relationships based on your helpfulness might end. But it's also liberating because you discover who values you versus who just needs you. You develop capacity for genuine intimacy rather than just caretaking, and you find that sustainable giving from fullness is far more satisfying than compulsive helping from emptiness. In the next video, I'm going to reveal what healthy helping actually looks like, how to give authentically, maintain boundaries while caring, and distinguish situations where helping serves genuine purpose from situations where it enables or exhausts you. Until then, examine honestly what's actually motivating your helpfulness. And what would change if you stopped trying to earn through helping what you actually deserve unconditionally? Your answers reveal both your current psychological work and your path toward helping that serves development rather than preventing it. Subscribe if you want psychology that examines the shadow side of seemingly positive behaviors, that distinguishes healthy from defensive patterns, and that supports genuine development rather than maintaining adaptive strategies that no longer serve you.